Hello everyone. Welcome to this special edition of our Firelight Chat. My guest is Nahid Fattahi. Nahid is a psychotherapist, she's a human rights activist, a writer, and she holds a position of adjunct professor of psychology in the psychology department at Pacific Oaks College. Her work delves into the intricate realms of human connection, human rights, and mental health. Obviously, we all know how important that is. Nahid, welcome. It's lovely to meet you in person, virtual person.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, thank you.
Nahid, I read an article, you wrote it in 2019. It was in the Daily Beast, and it was called, "I Was an Afghan Child Bride." And I really acknowledge you for keeping the story, the challenge, and the horror of so many Afghan women alive in the consciousness of people outside Afghanistan. Before 9/11, I don't remember how it first happened, but American women were becoming aware of the Taliban. We were becoming aware of things happening. And then, of course, 9/11 happened, and the situation became much better known. Your story is particularly profound, not only in terms of what you've experienced, but what you've learned and what you stand for now. So can you give us a capsulized version of what you went through?
Sure. My story begins when the Taliban were starting to take power the first time in Afghanistan. And that essentially happened due to various factors. One of the main ones is actually, U.S. and back then USSR or old Soviet Union's proxy war took place in Afghanistan in the late 70s and 80s. And the U.S. was funding the Mujahideen left and right, a group that war fighting really US's war or proxy war with the Soviet Union, and the war ended, and the U.S. left the Mujahideen with a whole lot of arms and guns, and left them to have their own war, their own civil war. During that time and during the war in between Russia and Afghanistan, or US's proxy war, many children, many young boys were orphans and were sent to madrasas in Pakistan. And that's how the Taliban actually became to be a power. So we can, in fact, argue that the origin of the Taliban really goes back to the rise of fundamentalism in that region due to the US and Soviets' Cold War. And the Taliban came into power in starting in mid-1995 to 96. And I was one of the first victims. And the reason I say this is because I come from quite an educated family, actually. My mother was a teacher, and so was my father, and I was the eldest. And this is 1995 in Herat, where we just had an earthquake a few days ago. And I still feel emotional talking about this. Essentially, the choice was they already had taken power in Kandahar, and they already did ban girls and women from attending the school. Things weren't looking good. And so my parents decided to, it was in between two choices. She's going to stay here. We will, remain here, wait to see what will happen. There will be no school, and, the fate of millions of other Afghan girls. Or we can, say yes to this marriage proposal and have her get married. I was 14 when I got married to somebody that had promised that would allow me to go to school and for me to get an education. And so that was the exchange essentially. And that's how I became a child bride. And the reason that I wrote that article in 2019 is because that's when the peace talks were happening. And my purpose with that article and with kind of addressing that part of my life, which I didn't really address. I mean, sometimes with trauma, we try to avoid thinking about it, talking about it, or anything that really remind us of that trauma. And that was my goal for most of my life until 2019. And the reason that I wrote that article was because of the peace talks. One of the things the Taliban have changed. And, I wrote that article from a very real experience. That was my experience. I was a victim of the Taliban back then. And my fear was that should we rush through these peace talks, that millions of other Afghan women will have the same fate as I did. And that's what exactly happened.
A couple of things. First of all, I want everybody to realize that when Nahid was talking about the history of Afghanistan and the rise of the Taliban, there's a movie called Charlie Wilson's War, and I very highly recommend it. Charlie Wilson's War popularized the story, and I mean popularized in the sense of explaining in a way we could all understand what happened with what Nahid keeps talking about, our proxy war with the Russians in Afghanistan, in a very similar way to what Ben Affleck did with the movie Argo regarding Iran. These are both egregious examples of the United States interfering with something where if they just stayed away, we actually ended up creating an even bigger monster.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't you agree with that, Nahid?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And the second thing...
It's raising a snake within one's sleeve, essentially.
Absolutely.
I think that's what the U.S. did with the Taliban and how the Taliban became the power that they became.
Absolutely. And then even that last scene in that movie is so profound. So these are great history lessons. Charlie Wilson's War, and of course Argo. But staying with Afghanistan, Charlie Wilson's War. The second thing that he just mentioned was something that impacted my own experience when I was running for president. She talks about in 2019 and the peace talks. At that time, and it was one of the things, like so many of the things that I experience actually as a candidate now, I was talking about, and people were saying, oh, right, oh, don't ignore that. Nahid, many of us as women were very aware women were not part of those peace talks. So when the American government was having its conversations on peace, and women were not even allowed at the table. And then, of course, everybody was so excited because when we left Afghanistan. I'm not criticizing the decision to leave, but some people like to say, well, there was no easier way to do it. There was a much better way to do it, and the better way to do it was, number one, first of all, we should have talked to women. Number two, clearly the effort to help women escape, particularly those who had helped us and would be the most vulnerable once the Taliban took over. There was clearly not a really strategized effort on the part of the U.S. government. I spoke up then. It still disgusts me. But I noticed at the time how hard it was to get that voice out there and the dismissal of this woman's issue. So, Nahid, I'm so with you, and I hope you know how many American women did try.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. And absolutely, they did. And many still, including yourself, are raising their voice and are talking about the miseries and the adversities that Afghan women are facing currently inside of Afghanistan. And I agree with you. I mean, especially as an Afghan, I used to be asked this question, do you think the U.S. should stay in Afghanistan or they should leave? And I would say, wow, that's just such a mouthful question. And it has so many responses. Of course, as an Afghan, I don't want my nation to be invaded by, a foreign country. But from the other hand, this is a mess that you have created. And the way the U.S. left, it has left a very bitter taste in the mouth of the world, I would say. We have lost so much responsibility.
I agree with you, Nahid. And so many people just like, oh, it's so great we left. There was so much more to it than that we left. It's how we left, and even more importantly, how we stayed. Everybody, if you go to my website at Marianne2024.com, there's a section. When the departure from Afghanistan occurred, I interviewed quite a few people. There are some podcasts there the last 20 years, and what a spectacular failure it was, because we really got to a point where people's hatred of the United States was not that much less at a certain point than their hatred of the Taliban, because of, once again, it wasn't about just stay or leave, it was how we stayed and what we were really doing there. And then, of course, how we left. You would agree with what I just said, Nahid?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it has created disasters, Marianne. I run some support groups just to give you an idea of what is happening there. And these women are suffering. These women are, suicide rates have gone up. Hundreds of girls are killing themselves on a daily basis. And I have talked to so many that are still fighting, still trying. And one of the things that I continue to hear is, but what is the point? There is no end to this. And you know what I say is that these girls and women are raising, child marriages, by the way, have gone up. And these girls and women are forced to have children, many of which are boys. And these boys are going to madrasas, similar to madrasas that the original Taliban soldiers went to in the 90s and 80s. And so I think one of my biggest thing, and I think I tweeted this a while ago, that all the presidential candidates should really talk about this. What are we going to do? How are we going to prevent another 9/11? Which I would not be surprised if it happens, and I'm very afraid of that. Because to be honest with you, as an Afghan American, I always love and adore Afghanistan. But the US is, a place where it has given me a second chance, and my children are from here. And so I want this country to be safe. I want this country to stay prosperous and be a safe place for everyone. And I'm worried.
You've made several references to the madrasas. Would you tell people what they are and where they are?
Yes, these madrasas were originally in Pakistan mainly. Now they have madrasas in Afghanistan as well. They are essentially religious schools. And they teach, I would say, the wrong format of what Islam is. Because the Islam that I know as a Muslim woman is about peace and humanity and love. That's what I have learned from the Islam that I was taught, the Islam that was handed to me by my mother and grandmother and their mothers and their fathers. The version of Islam that these kids learn in madrasa is that there are the Muslims and then there are the infidels. Essentially anybody who's not a Muslim or does not believe in the format of their Islam, I would essentially be an infidel too in their eyes perhaps, that they deserve death and thou shalt not live, because they don't believe in our version of Islam, that women are second-class citizens, and that if somebody steals, even because they are starving and hungry and they need to feed their children, we shall cut their hands. That's what they're being taught at those madrasas.
But the madrasas are not only in Pakistan and Afghanistan, they are elsewhere as well. Is that correct?
I'm assuming, but those type of madrasas are, there are religious schools in other parts of the world as well, Islamic religious school, where the true version of Islam is taught. These are madrasas that are taught by illiterate men who have no, way of analyzing or, being, or have any type of credential to teach. And these kids are being abused there in these madrasas, right? And the collective trauma can make people extremely apathetic.
Did you ever read a book called The Dressmaker of Kirkana by Gail Lamont?
The Dressmaker of Khairkhane, I have read it many moons ago.
It was a real eye-opener. So tell me about, given the conditions today, this is apparently, even though we were told this was going to be a softer, sweeter version of the Taliban, when it comes to women particularly, it doesn't seem to be a softer, sweeter version of the Taliban. Is that correct?
Absolutely not. They're not. And by any levels, they're not the softer, sweeter version of the, minorities in Afghanistan are, if we have a minority group, the Hazaras, they are being targeted. They're being attacked. Just a few days ago, one of their mosques was attacked again. Hundreds of people were killed while they were praying. Again, because their version of Islam is also different than the Taliban. That's one of the main reasons that they're being targeted. And women they have lost all of their rights.
Given
women
that
can only go to school up to 4th grade. It used to be 6th, but now it's 4th grade. And everything else is closed on them, including many jobs.
And they can't leave the house except with a male relative, is that correct?
Yes, it has to be a male chaperone.
Yeah. And they can't work? And
they can't work.
And they have to be completely covered?
They have to be completely covered. They cannot work. They cannot go to school. They cannot leave their home without a male chaperone. They cannot travel without having a permission from, a household, a head of household who has to be a male again. And so now you can imagine there are many households because many men in Afghanistan have actually been killed during the 20 years of war that the US was there and prior to that. Many households are being run all by women. There is no man in many of those households.
And I was reading just the other day about a park, a national park, that they recently said that women could not go to. And it was, tell us about the park and how it was this one place where women could go and enjoy themselves and be in nature. Explain that.
Beautiful national parks that are spread obviously around Afghanistan, and I think the one thing that these women could do up to just a couple of months ago was to have a picnic in these parks with their families and get some fresh air, and that was taken away from them too. Women are not allowed in these national parks anymore. Women are they're less than second-class citizen. I mean, I really don't have a word. I don't know what to compare it to, and it breaks my heart. It's
they're practically slaves, actually.
Yeah, they are. They are.
Yeah.
They are.
Given the spectacular failure of American foreign policy vis-a-vis Afghanistan for over 20 years, and I say that certainly with respect for all those American personnel, military personnel who lost their lives there. I deeply respect that, but I think we all understand that there was deeply misguided policy. Given what we've already tried and whatever we were trying to do, not enough of what you're talking about, and failed, what is there that the United States can do now regarding this horrifying problem?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I think, the first thing is really starting, to have the United States puts pressure on the Taliban, and the international community as a whole must come together to engage in talks again, with the Taliban, about the concerns of human rights and women's rights there. I think something that they could leverage is the economic and the diplomatic sanctions, because I know that the U.S. still continues to support the Taliban. Actually, they need to have some type of punitive measures in place for the Taliban to feel pressured by the U.S. and by the international community to reassess how they are treating women and how they are, ruling as a. I cannot even call them a government, whatever they are.
Is there any international effort at this point?
Not really. No international. I mean, they talk about it here and there. You see the United Nations mentioning. They just had their annual gathering in New York, and there were some roundtables regarding women in Afghanistan. But especially after the Ukraine and Russia's war, Afghanistan is really nobody's concern anymore. But it will become it, and what I'm really emphasizing, that it will soon become everybody's concern, because the reality is that the world is much more connected, and I look at the world as this chain, and imagine just one of the loops start rusting on a chain, right? The rest of the loops will slowly, if not immediately, will rust as well. I think Afghanistan is that rusting loop in this chain called our world, our earth. And I think if we don't address what is happening there, that it will be everybody's concern soon.
When we went into Afghanistan after 9/11, it was because of it having been used as a kind of incubator space for Al-Qaeda. Do you believe that such forces are being incubated in Afghanistan now?
I have no doubt. I mean, it seems like the U.S. has made a deal, and Biden loves the Taliban because of that. He feels like he has made this peace deal with the quote-unquote terrorists, essentially, that they are not going to be a concern for U.S.'s safety and security. And that they are promising the government here that they will not be, and that they're not. But I think what I'm asking, and what sort of confuses me at least, is that if, let's say, the US government is seeing that the Taliban are lies after lies, that they are not even towards their own people, how is the government here feels or has any type of guarantee that they're telling the truth? Absolutely not.
In American foreign policy, I think our two major character defects is, number one, how mean we can be, and number two, how naive we can be.
I think so too, Marianne. I think so too. I think we are really the bully of the world, really. That I think that's how America is, at least our foreign policies. It's a great nation with so many opportunities. It's a beautiful country. But our foreign policies, that is, has screwed up, for the lack of a better word.
Yeah, what kills me is these men in suits. They think they're so smart because of all the brute force that they can exert, and then on the other hand, sometimes they're so foolish and taken so easily and played so easily. And the idea that we would continue...
What they did with Iraq, right?
Pardon?
What they did to Iraq is unforgivable. And Bush, he made a mistake while he was describing Ukraine and Russia, and he made a mistake and he said, well, Iraq, and then he corrected himself, and the whole room laughed with him. That's our foreign policy. And we're talking about millions of lives lost.
So Nahid, you and I, we were talking before we came on. You and I have been meaning to do this interview numerous times. I think this is the third time, finally, we're getting to do it, either, I don't know, my traveling schedule, whatever. And we just happened to be speaking tonight, which is a really horrifying night in many ways for all people of goodwill. A week ago, the Hamas attacks occurred against Israel, and now apparently Israel is preparing for a ground invasion. You are a Muslim woman, I'm a Jewish woman. Yeah. One of the points that I made in a video I recorded earlier today is that for centuries, if not longer, Jews and Muslims were, we're first cousins, right? Look back in the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can even see it. We look like first cousins. It's fascinating. Yeah. What are your thoughts? And how are we going to exit the horror of what is the relationship between Israel and Palestine now?
To say that my heart is breaking for all the lives lost on both sides is an underestimate. And, as somebody who has lived through being bombarded and through the invasion of the Soviet Union, I know what it is like to live in war. I think, what we need to keep in mind is that the red blood of an Israeli child is really just as precious as that of a Palestinian child. And the heartbreak of a Palestinian mother mourning the lifeless body of her son and daughter taken away by the Israeli militant is as agonizing to witness as an Israeli mother grieving over the lifeless body of her child killed by Hamas. The reality is, and the undeniable truth here is that human lives hang in the balance here, and humanity is once again left in shame. I think we need to come together as a world and really stand up for humanity here. And we need to see through the lens of our values with a deep appreciation for humans and for human life. To be honest with you, I think that is the only way that we can save what is left of humanity.
I agree with you. Anyone who takes this binary approach, this exaltation of one quote-unquote side or the other, and at the expense of the other, is not participating in creating a way forward.
It is not.
In A Course in Miracles, there is a line, God does not give you victory in battle, he lifts you above the battlefield. Yeah. That we have to find that higher consciousness and perspective on all humanity. People keep saying, well, this country or that is our ally. Humanity must be our ally at this point.
Humanity must be our ally. And so what is happening right now to people in Gaza is just so heartbreaking. It's important for us to stand with the people of Gaza and stand with humanity, but oppose Hamas. Definitely oppose Hamas. Right? Stand with the Jewish people and the Israelis, but the government, right? If we are able to separate the two, then we will stand with humanity because we're talking about people's lives.
We're definitely talking about people's lives. And serious questions that humanity has to ask ourselves about the limits of brute force in bringing forth any kind of true solution. Because as we all know, hate begets hate. Gandhi said, an eye for an eye leaves everyone blind, but in this case, an eye for an eye could leave everyone dead. And you mentioned something very serious earlier, that Americans tend to look at 9/11 and think, well, we already had that horror. And we should not underestimate the perils that lie ahead if this thing continues to grow exponentially.
Not.
As a Jewish woman, I join with you in the realization that the heartbreak of a Jewish mother, the heartbreak of a Muslim mother, Israeli mother, Palestinian mother, equally tragic. And not an accident here. You know, on one hand, talking about Afghanistan, and listen, we have, God knows we don't have a Taliban here in the United States, but we do have forces which are actively working to diminish the rights of women, and which do seem to see women as somehow second-class citizens. I'm not comparing this to the Taliban, but there are some ancient malevolences at foot on the planet today, things that we sort of thought we had gotten rid of, at least in this part of the world. And yet at the same time, here you see the suppression of women, the oppression, the repression, the horrors towards women in a country like Afghanistan. And then conversations like yours and mine, sharing the grief of women, and also knowing that there's something about the conversation we're having as women which speaks to the only possibility of moving forward, because it's a more heartfelt conversation.
I think so too. And I really think more women should be in power. I think it is time for the US to be run by a woman. I think a woman's foreign policies, I think a woman will view foreign policies very differently. I have read some of your views on our foreign policies and on domestic issues. You know, I'm a psychotherapist. I work in mental health, and I see the suffering and the adversities that people are facing here. I live in the Bay Area. San Francisco is really close to my home, and San Francisco is going through a crisis of its own. Right? It's so much is happening here. I see people still struggling to go and see a doctor or a mental health practitioner or get their medication because they don't have health coverage, and yet the US, we spend billions of dollars on wars that wasn't even necessary to begin with.
You're absolutely correct. But I also, as a candidate for president, have seen a lot of not only overt misogyny, but a lot of internalized misogyny, discounting the voice of a woman. Some of the chains that hold us back, that shackle us, are invisible. They're inside our own heads. So I hope that the tears of the women in Gaza and the women in Israel will help awaken the heart of humanity. And
I really hope so too.
I really appreciate your talking to me. I appreciate your telling your story. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience?
I just encourage anyone who's watching this to don't give up on humanity. And when we say humanity, humanity means the lives and the livelihood of girls and women in Afghanistan. Don't leave them alone. Don't think that, that's just a part of their culture. They are just, savages, and that's what they do to their women because they don't. That's not a part of our culture. That wasn't forced on us.
I can promise you that throughout my career in any kind of political involvement running for office, I have continued to be very vocal about the women of Afghanistan. And I promise you, if I become president of the United States, they will not be forgotten in the Oval Office.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you. And
You're
I
welcome.
ask people to just always stand with humanity, regardless of where we are from and what race or religion we identify with. If we all stood with humanity first, I think we would be in a different place. We would have had a different world and a different earth. But I still have hope that we can continue to do that.
Amen.
Amen to that.
God bless you, Nahid. Thank you so much for joining us. And tell people how they can reach you. Tell people anything you want them to know about your work and how they can find you.
Sure. I mean, I'm active on Twitter and Instagram.
And that's at Nahid Fattahi?
Nahid Fattahi, yes, on
Twitter. And we will put that down
Instagram
there as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, most of my work is just really around humanity and raising awareness. I think that's
well. It's beautiful that you're keeping the story of Afghan women alive, and I join with you in knowing how important it is and doing whatever I can to keep it alive as well.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. I know that Nahid's story touched your heart as it touches mine. Let's keep the flame alive. Talk to you later. Thank you, Nahid.